So let me start by having you take a look at what has just been this ridiculous fluctuation in the volume of activity that we've handled in the last couple of years. If you look at the blue and the orange lines, that was our typical seasonality pre-pandemic. The gray line in 2020, you saw that everything dropped off when the world went into shutdown. And even in spite of that, we had a 1.4% increase in cargo volume over the previous year. Then take a look at the golden line, which is last year, 2021, and we were at significantly elevated levels over 2020, again, which was still a record, and we handled 18.5% more cargo than the previous year. And then finally, if you look at what we're doing year to date for 2022, in the upper blue line, we're even higher still than what we were in 2021. And year to date, we are operating at 11.5% over last year. 70% of this year's growth is West Coast cargo that has shifted to New York and New Jersey. So that is part of what we're all trying to deal with in this day and age. And all totaled, as we've heard, we're talking about a 34% increase over prior pandemic, which is just staggering. And think about what type of business could possibly accommodate a 34% growth in commerce, in business, especially one that is so interdependent like the maritime industry and our ports and our supply chains, without there being significant investment and time put into that investment throughout the entire supporting sector. Yet until earlier this year, in spite of all of this, the Port of New York and New Jersey was handling this record volume pretty well, all things considered, thanks to the investment that the Port Authority and our terminal operators that you'll hear from had made leading up to the pandemic, and very significant investment since the pandemic. This slide should look relatively familiar to most of you, as it is an adaptation of what we were briefing for the Port Master Plan. So our Port Master Plan that was completed in 2019 forecasted that by 2050, we were going to see somewhere between a doubling to a tripling of our cargo volume. By 2050, we expect to handle somewhere between 12 and 17 million TEUs, and that all depends on whether our focus is exclusively on our local market, or very heavily on our local market, or very, very heavily on our discretionary market and utilizing the express rail system and maximizing further investment in the express rail system. For planning purposes, we've said we're going to do the middle of the road. We're going to target about 14 million TEUs for 2050. But look at where we are right now. We are doing the volume today that we did not forecast doing until 2026, 2027. So without the rest of those interdependent sectors of the supply chain having been prepared to handle this growth, we are obviously, struggling with the issues that we've been talking about here for the last 2 hours. So the general, I think, walked, was it the general or the I think it was Dan Maffei who stole my pipeline. This is my all-time favorite slide. And really, not going to talk about the words, but what we have is a pipeline that starts out with a fairly robust diameter, and then as we move through the supply chain, gets to a trickle. It's the pipe coming in from your street, going to your kitchen sink, as somebody said, is clogged up. And all of the things that I've listed there are some of the issues, and it's just a sample of the issues that each sector in the supply chain has been dealing with in these last couple of years, but it's clear that it is a system. It is an ecosystem. It is a system of systems in which every sector needs to be operating in the same manner. And at this juncture, we're not. right? So we need to, what is clear is that if we want the supply chain in the Port of New York and New Jersey and the national supply chain to operate well, it's not just about investments that need to be made in equipment and personnel and space and so many other things, but every sector in the supply chain needs to start changing their behavior. This is a behavioral problem. This is an investment problem, but if we can invest, and all these guys are investing heavily in the terminals, as is the Port Authority, but our investment is going to be wasted if we don't all change our behavior in order to accommodate the growth that we're handling. You know, the definition of being insane, right, is, you know, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We're handling 34 or 35% more cargo than we were handling prior to the pandemic, and we can't do it the same way. We have to change our behavior or nothing is going to change for us. So I'm going to go back. How do I go back? I'm going to hold that slide for a second. So what have we all been doing? So in addition to the Council on Port Performance, you know, that John, you know, talked about, and throughout the early days of the pandemic, we were meeting on a weekly basis. We eventually dialed that back to every other week and then, you know, monthly. But the terminal operators, the Port Authority, under an FMC discussion agreement, thank you very much, have been meeting now every Friday morning since mid-February in order to talk about capacity and fluidity. And what is it that we can do in order to improve capacity and fluidity? And the Shipping Association of the Port of New York and New Jersey joins us as a guest at that. So what we have been able to do at this juncture and all of the changes that have been made, and I'm going to talk from a high level and the terminals will get into more specifics, but Saturday gates at 3 terminals for a year and a half at a cost of $30 million, $30 million to move 4% of our total volume. That's the definition of insanity. The terminal operators adjusting their berth schedules in order to accommodate 55 empty loaders with more on their way. Technology updated, various apps, websites, softwares in order to increase transparency and functionality. Peel-off piles that when they started, there was a cost to participate in a peel-off pile are now being offered at no cost to the shippers. Imports and empties are moving by rail to 4 new destinations, including back to the West Coast. We've created 60, these guys have created 60 additional acres of container storage capacity port-wide by tearing down buildings, relocating things, doing all sorts of magical stuff that they've been able to do inside in order to handle the volume. They've invested $250 million in the last 18 months combined on new cargo handling equipment so that there was more velocity through the terminals. The Port Authority added 22 acres of pop-up space for the purposes of empty container depots and depots for long-dwelling import containers. We went through an effort in the early days of the pandemic to find every square inch of warehouse space and yard capacity that was available in the region and made marriages with those who needed it because they had run out of space in their own warehouses. And of course, at this point, all of that space is available. We've connected shippers, BCOs, freight forwarders with additional trucking capacity because the truckers that they were engaged with didn't have enough capacity to handle, you know, the additional volume. And what we have seen happening in the Port of New York and New Jersey is we have 1,900 new trucks that are doing the business of the port every single day this year. 1,500 net new truck drivers doing the work in the Port of New York and New Jersey. Workforce development, right? Who among you is not having an issue with finding workers that want to work or that want to show up to work, which in our industry is a little challenging if you don't want to physically show up to work. So we have a very extensive and very robust workforce development program focusing not only on truck drivers, feeding the longshore needs, but feeding the warehouses. The labor in the warehouses has been particularly challenged in the last couple of years. And then finally, the one I want to mention is that the container imbalance fee, I know it's gotten a lot of attention in the last 5 weeks or so, but last thing the Port Authority wants to do is actually charge a new fee, believe it or not. But what we wanted to do was to spur movement. And I'm very, very pleased that the ocean carriers have really stepped up in the last 4 or 5 weeks in order to come up with robust plans in order to evacuate those empty containers. I think some pressure from Commissioner Dye and Chairman Maffei and the General, might actually have helped that. But whatever it takes, we're all happy to do that. So we need to continue along these lines. The discussion agreement is going to continue to meet. The CPP is going to continue to meet and identify, things that we need to, address and resolve. And the Port Authority staff is working from the end of the supply chain back to the port so that we can begin to discuss, starting at the warehouses and working our way back, the need to change behavior. So finally, I would say that coming out of our discussion agreement is an update to our dashboard. So we started to do a dashboard right at the beginning of the pandemic that was really more talking about the status of various sectors of the industry, including availability of Coast Guard and customs and pilots and tugboats. And over time of the last several months with the terminal operators, we launched this version of the dashboard last Friday. We are now sharing publicly on our website through distribution from a Port Authority distribution, and then hopefully we will put it on the Port Truck Pass system shortly. But the number of single and double moves that we're making every day, the number of trouble tickets, which continues to be a problem, turn times, number of rail cargo that we're moving out, and the ships at anchorage. So Liz Langmaid, so put your hand up. So if you're not on the distribution and you want to be on the distribution, please see Liz or Dan. I'm going to put you both on it. Please see Liz or Dan, and we'll get you on that distribution list. So behavior change and investment.